In recent years, we've been fortunate enough to see the closure of some of the world's most heinous unsolved mysteries, from the apprehension of the Golden State Killer to that of Paul Flores, who was responsible for the murder of Kristen Smart in 1996. However, some of the most baffling cases of the last century still remain frustratingly unsolved. Join us for today's episode as we examine two infamous cold cases that are still unsolved. Sharon Gallegos, formerly known as Little Miss Nobody. On July 31st, 1960, the body of a young girl was discovered in Sand Wash Creek Bed on Old Alamo Road in Congress, Arizona, by a schoolteacher who had been out collecting rocks to decorate his garden. The girl was clothed in red shorts, a blue buttoned-up blouse, and she had sandals on her feet that had previously been in adult size and cut down to fit her. Her toenails and fingernails had been painted red. Little evidence was recovered from the scene. Investigators later theorized that 2 other attempts had been made to dig a grave for the child, and there were further disturbances in the ground near where she was found. Furthermore, tire marks indicated that the perpetrator had driven off Highway 93, about half a mile west of where she was found, and then turned the vehicle around and left after disposing of the body. Other items of note that were found included an adult-sized set of footprints, and possibly those of a sandal-footed child, indicated that the little girl had walked with her killer to the burial site. Although a bloodied and rusted knife was found at the scene, it was never conclusively connected to the case. The girl was described as being white, between the ages of 5 and 7, and standing between 3'6" and 4'5" tall. She likely weighed around 50 to 60 pounds and had been dead for around 2 weeks before she was found. Although her hair color was brown, there was some evidence that it had been tinted or dyed an auburn shade. Furthermore, her teeth were in notably good condition. Her cause of death, however, couldn't be established, though the case was quickly ruled a homicide. There was no evidence of puncture wounds or bone fractures, but her body was charred from having been set alight around the time of her death. Over the following weeks, investigators searched for answers. Local child sex offenders were interrogated, and the records of missing children in the surrounding states were combed through. There was some speculation that the little girl belonged to a family of transients due to an eyewitness account from July 27th, just a few days prior to the discovery of her body, and a transient family was later interviewed, but eventually they were ruled out of the investigation. In August, less than a week later, authorities began to speculate that the body was that of Sharon Gallegos, a 4-year-old who disappeared from Alamogordo, New Mexico on July 21, 1960. Though the clothing she wore was inconsistent with what Jane Doe was found in, investigators stated that they couldn't rule out Sharon because clothing could easily be changed. However, they later stated that they didn't believe she was the unidentified child because of the differences between Jane Doe's estimated age and Sharon's age. In March of 1961, authorities investigated the possibility that the discovered body was that of Deborah Jane Dudley, a missing 4-year-old from Virginia. Deborah's older sister, Carol Ann, who was 7, was discovered dead and wrapped in a blanket on February 9, 1961, having died after suffering severe abuse and neglect at the hands of her parents. Deborah's remains were later found in southern Virginia, and their parents were both charged with murders. The case of the unknown little girl eventually grew cold as leads dried up and evidence failed to produce further information. While she was unidentified, she was dubbed Little Miss Nobody. It wasn't until 2018 that the case began to receive renewed interest, when investigators had the little girl's body exhumed so they could take a DNA sample. This event was funded by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The sample was successfully collected, and a new forensic examination was carried out on the remains, which revealed that Little Miss Nobody was not between the ages of 5 to 7. She was more likely between the ages of 3 and 6, and her height was estimated to be around 3'6". The University of Northern Texas Center for Human Identification subsequently made a facial reconstruction of what she may have looked like while she was alive, although it didn't lead to any new progress in the case. It wasn't until 2022, when genealogy testing was used, that Little Miss Nobody was finally given her true name. On March 15th, it was officially announced that she was indeed missing 4-year-old Sharon Gallegos. Her body was later reburied next to her mother and grandmother following a small ceremony held by her living family members. At the time of her disappearance, Sharon lived in Alamogordo in New Mexico with her mother, 2 older siblings, her grandmother, and 6 other relatives, 4 of whom were also children. She had no contact with her biological father, who'd left her mother when Sharon was just a baby. According to the family, life was difficult due to financial restraints, but they were a close-knit group. Loved ones recalled Sharon as feisty and happy-go-lucky. She loved playing outside with her siblings and the other neighborhood children, and enjoyed being tasked with simple errands. On July 21st, 1960, at around 3 p.m., Sharon was taken while playing in an alley at the back of her house with her 2 cousins. A couple approached the 4-year-old and offered her candy and clothing if she climbed into their car. Sharon, however, declined. She was ultimately dragged into the vehicle, which was described as a dirty, old green car, and is believed to be a dark green 1951 or 1952 model Dodge or Plymouth sedan. The person who forced Sharon into the car was a woman whom witnesses said was short, heavy-set, and in her 30s. She had dirty blonde hair and wore glasses. The man in the vehicle was described as thin, with a fair complexion, long nose, and straight, sandy-colored hair. After Sharon was dragged inside, the car sped off. It was last seen turning onto 5th Street. Sharon's cousins immediately alerted her mother, who called the police. Within an hour, authorities had set up roadblocks at the Texas-New Mexico state border and stopped any vehicle that matched the eyewitness's description. Despite this, the perpetrators were never caught. Investigators later stated their belief that the couple who took Sharon had stalked the 4-year-old for weeks before she went missing. On July 17th, just several days before she vanished, a couple were spotted in a dark green sedan shortly after the Gallegos family attended a church service. The couple already had 2 children in the back of the car, 1 boy and 1 girl, and several witnesses later recalled that the woman asked church service attendees multiple questions about Sharon and her mother. Sharon's mother also told the authorities that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Sharon had become more apprehensive and wary. She often didn't want to run the errands that her mother asked of her, like running to the grocery store, things she had once been happy and comfortable doing. She also became visibly upset whenever she saw the dark green sedan, and often asked relatives to pick her up and carry her past it. 2 days before Sharon was taken, a woman resembling the one who forced her into the sedan was seen knocking on a neighbor's door. She reportedly asked the neighbor about Sharon and her mother, and was specifically looking for their address. She also asked about how many children they had and what the state of their current financial situation was. The woman claimed that she was asking such questions because she was looking to offer the family a job. Investigators knew that following the kidnapping, the perpetrators likely weren't looking for a ransom. Since the Gallegos were hardly swimming in cash, it seemed much more likely, given all the information, that Sharon had been specifically targeted. But why she was targeted is unclear to this day. Despite the mass media attention around the case, no suspects have been announced yet, and the investigation into her death is still ongoing. If you have any information about Sharon's case, you can contact the Alamogordo Police Department at 575-429-4300. Anne Marie Burr. At around 8 o'clock on the evening of August 30th, 1961, 8-year-old Anne Marie Burr and her 3 younger siblings headed to bed. The 4 lived with their parents in Tacoma, Washington, and both Anne Marie and her younger sister Mary, who was just 3, shared a bedroom, while 7-year-old Julie and 5-year-old Gregory shared another. At some point in the middle of the night, Anne Marie woke her parents to alert them that Mary was crying. The little girl had recently broken her arm and had to wear a cast until it was healed. Their mother, Beverly, comforted Mary before instructing them both to go to sleep. In the small hours of the morning, the family's dog started barking, although it's unclear if this is relevant to the case. Beverly awoke to the sound of Mary crying again at around 5:30 a.m. She entered the girl's bedroom to find that Anne-Marie was missing. Beverly recalled that she had locked up that night like she always did, having locked and bolted the front door. But now, the front door was slightly ajar, and the window in the living room had been pushed open. A red thread was discovered stuck to the frame, while a garden bench that had previously been behind the house had been moved to the window, allowing someone to climb down unscathed. A footprint could be seen outside of the window, and though it had been warped a little by the previous night's rainfall, authorities later concluded it was likely from a size 6 or 7 Keds trainer, which probably belonged to a small-statured man or a teenager. A similar footprint could be viewed at the back of the house, close to the basement window. A partial palm print was later retrieved from the bench, and a small quantity of biological evidence was left behind at the point of entry. It was believed to be from the perpetrator. There were no signs of struggle in Anne-Marie's bedroom or in the rest of the house. The siblings who slept in the basement had not been disturbed during the night. Beverly recalled that she and her husband had heard the dog barking, but assumed it had been spooked by the bad weather. Anne-Marie's disappearance was reported by her parents immediately, and authorities soon arrived to begin an investigation. After viewing the footprints, they checked out the 8-year-old's room. Her mother noted that nothing was missing, suggesting that she hadn't left voluntarily. At the time of her disappearance, she would have been wearing a blue nightgown, a chain necklace with a Madonna and child medallion on it, and an ID bracelet. The search for Anne-Marie involved 100 soldiers stationed at Fort Lewis, 50 members of the National Guard, and local police and volunteers. By 11 p.m. that night, over 75 square blocks around the Burr residence had been searched, but no evidence was recovered. Shortly afterwards, dive teams were brought in to scour Commencement Bay, but again, search efforts proved fruitless. Around this time, neighbors told the police that they'd sometimes seen someone peering in through the windows of the Burr's house, but they were unable to give a useful description. In the first 12 days alone, over 1,500 people were interviewed in connection with the disappearance, including several potential suspects. Investigators firmly believed that Anne-Marie had been taken by someone she knew, since she didn't seem to struggle, but they also made sure to examine the possibility that sex offenders in the area could be responsible. The first such potential suspect was Hugh Morse, a 31-year-old thought to be connected to the 1959 murder of 9-year-old Candy Rogers. Morse was a convicted serial killer with a lengthy criminal record who was jailed for good in 1961, following a 10-year crime spree. Over the decade, he was jailed for numerous offenses, including rape, burglary, assault, and child molestation. He was later ruled out in Candy Rogers' death through DNA, but it doesn't appear that he was ever conclusively ruled out of Anne-Marie's case. Another suspect was a local teen boy, 15-year-old Robert Bruises, who had a good relationship with Anne-Marie, and he reportedly referred to her as "my girl," while the 8-year-old referred to him as "lover boy." Though no evidence could be found to tie Bruises to the case, he failed his first polygraph test, raising some suspicions. He claimed it was due to his nerves and passed a second. In 1964, investigators attempted to tie Ralph Everett Larkey to the case, but he took his own life before he could be apprehended by investigators. Larkey was a suspect in another abduction case as well. Following Anne-Marie's disappearance, her family received a ransom demand, but police were able to track the man who made it, and it was discovered that he was not involved with the case at all. He was later charged with disorderly conduct. The main reason Anne-Marie's case is so infamous is that the most notable suspect in her case is the famed serial killer Ted Bundy. After Bundy was apprehended in 1978, investigators looked at him in relation to the disappearance of the 8-year-old, with many people, the media and internet sleuths alike, questioning whether or not she was his first real victim. Bundy lived in Tacoma when he was 14 years old and worked as a paperboy in Anne-Marie's neighborhood in 1961. Furthermore, he had a great uncle whom he often visited, who taught at a university, the campus of which was just a few blocks from the Burr's residence. The size 6 shoe print left at the scene of the disappearance would have been consistent with Bundy as a teen perpetrator. Though he was questioned about the case, Bundy declined to confess. He told law enforcement that he wouldn't have hurt a little girl, despite the fact that he famously killed 12-year-old Kimberly Leach right before he was apprehended. Another decade later, in 1987, Bundy told author Robert D. Keppel that there were some cases he would never talk about because he carried them out too close to home, too close to family, or involved victims who were very young. It has been pointed out that Anne-Marie's case fits perfectly into all three of these categories. Anne-Marie's parents stated they did not know Bundy and had never met him, and neither had their daughter. Crime writer and journalist Rebecca Morris, however, argued that from her research and sources, the two did in fact know one another. Quote, Anne liked to follow Ted around when he got his newspapers ready for delivery in the afternoon. Morris has also noted that Bundy told an eerie tale to investigators shortly before his execution. Quote, speaking in the third person, hypothetically, he basically told the story about a very early crime where he took a young girl out of a house, sexually assaulted her in the orchard next door. Notably, Anne-Marie and her family lived next to an orchard. Bundy concluded his hypothetical story by stating that he dumped the girl in a deep ditch and watched as her family and police searched for her. It has been argued, however, that Bundy liked to play games with investigators and didn't tend towards telling the truth, leading some to speculate he was simply toying with the authorities and Anne-Marie's loved ones. Anne-Marie's parents, meanwhile, told the media of their belief that their daughter's remains had been buried on the UPS campus, as there was a construction underway there at the time of her disappearance. Beverly Burr contacted Bundy following his arrest, but he denied being involved and referred to himself as a normal 14-year-old boy at the time. Beverly added that Bundy tended to avoid the real questions. In 2011, Bundy's DNA was compared to that of the evidence found at the Burrs' home, but a full DNA profile couldn't be pulled from this evidence, and so it failed to connect him to the scene of the crime. Anne-Marie Burr's case is still unsolved. She was last seen on the night of August 30th, 1961, at her parents' home in Tacoma, Washington, when she was just 8 years old. She is described as a white female with blonde hair and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was 4 foot 2 inches tall and was wearing an ankle-length blue nightgown with white and blue flowers on it. She also wore a silver ID bracelet and a chain necklace with a Madonna and Child medallion on it. Anne-Marie has red marks on her left hand and malformed fingernails due to a fungal infection. If she is still alive, she will be 72 years old. Her father and mother died in 2003 and 2008 respectively, but her siblings are still alive and hoping to find answers. If you have any information about Anne-Marie's disappearance, you can contact the Tacoma Police Department at 253-798-4721 or Crime Stoppers USA at 1-800-222-8477. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.